Lake sturgeon are the largest fish in the Great Lakes and have ties to ancestors that are more than 20 million years old. The scientific name for lake sturgeon is Accipenser fulvescens, and they are one of 27 species in the order of Accipensiformes, which are only located in the waters in the northern hemisphere. Before the 1900s, lake sturgeon were considered a nuisance fish and subsequently slaughtered, until it was later discovered that they served an economic purpose. From the 1900s to 1986, there is very little data regarding the population of lake sturgeon in the Great Lakes. All that was known was that the populations continued to decline. From 1987 to now, there is only a small fraction of the lake sturgeon population left. They are now considered an endangered species in the US and Canada. The good news, however, is that populations are starting to rise again. Lake sturgeon have a very distinct body shape, as they have a prehistoric look to them. Their bodies are surrounded by bony plates that serve as protection against predators. Seeing as they are bottom feeders, the mouths are on the lower halves of their bodies and they are meant to suck food off the bottom. Barbels are like whiskers and are located near the mouth of the fish, and their function is to help to locate food. Not unlike many other species in the Great Lakes, the sturgeon has fins to help them swim and gills to help them breathe. The purpose of marking sturgeon is to assess populations or to provide an overview of fish stocking programs. There are several ways of tagging sturgeon, some of which include fin clips, scoot removal, floy tags, coated wire tags, visual implant elastometers, radiosonic telemetry, and finally passive integrated transponders. Each of these methods have their own pros and cons.
Lake sturgeon range from Alberta to Quebec and from southern Hudson Bay to Alabama. Lake sturgeon often live in an array of different areas throughout their life. Most adult sturgeon prefer the bottom of shallow areas of large lakes to live, anywhere from 2 to 10 meters. However, they do migrate into rivers for spawning, which usually takes place in early spring. In areas such as Alberta, though, lake sturgeon spend their entire lives in large rivers and streams. During the winter, lake sturgeon typically move to deeper depths, where they remain mostly stagnant until the spring. Lake sturgeon choose their habitat based mostly on the availability of food. Some reports have indicated that a barrier-free range of 250 to 300 kilometers of lakes and rivers is the minimum requirement for a self-sustaining lake sturgeon population. I will now discuss impacts to the sturgeon's habitat. Human behavior is the primary cause of degradation to the lake sturgeon population. The depletion of lake sturgeon population began with overfishing, which took place from the late 1800s to the 20th century. These days, the biggest threats to the sturgeon are the construction of dams, which limit sturgeon's movement and their access to spawning grounds, dredging and channelization, which degrades or completely destroys spawning grounds, habitat contamination by chemical pollution, toxins, and agriculture runoff. This alters the availability of nutrients and food sources, and also some chemicals affect the sturgeon's feeding habits by altering their sense of smell. And the introduction of non-native species, which are competing in predatory fish and plants that can modify their habitat. Here are some potential remedies to those impacts. Stricter regulations have begun to show some positive effects on lake sturgeon populations. Some hydroelectric companies have tried creating fish channels that go around the dam so that fish can move downriver unharmed. This method has proven to be beneficial to many fish species. However, not so much for sturgeon, as they are weak swimmers and cannot escape the dangers of the dam. Remediation and construction of new spawning grounds is an effective avenue. However, it is expensive. The installation of wastewater treatment plants has been proven to show an improvement in sturgeon populations, as less nutrients are entering the water, as well as nearshore remediation that helps prevent runoff. Much more commitment to implementing solutions is needed to improve the habitat and continued survival of the lake sturgeon.
I am going to talk about the lake sturgeon's diet. The lake sturgeon is a large species fish that survives by feeding on smaller species. The lake sturgeon sifts through the mud to find its food. They are primarily bottom feeders that feed from a protruding tube-like mouth, which uses sensory feelers to locate food. This tube acts like a vacuum and sucks up food, then swallows it whole due to its lack of teeth. Both plant and animals are valid sources of food. One is not preferred over the other. Examples of animal food sources are snails, larvae, worms, leeches, and clams. Lake sturgeon have also been known to eat the invasive species of zebra mussels. Any silt, gravel, or any other bottom materials that are taken up in this process are expelled through the gills. The food is then ground up by their muscular gizzard-like stomachs. Now I'm going to talk about the lake sturgeon's spawning. The maturation process is extremely slow for lake sturgeon. Males can take up to 15 years to start to reproduce, while females can take another 10 years later. Lake sturgeon usually aren't fully mature until the third decade of their life, which is 30 years. Ideal spawning time is in the late spring when the water temperature is close to 11 degrees, in an area with fast-moving water and a rocky bottom. Females commonly lay 100,000 to 1,000,000 eggs during their spawning period. They are slow to mature and generally do not spawn for their first time until they are 9 to 23 years old, depending on the species. Mature sturgeon do not spawn every year. Males spawn every 2 to 3 years, whereas females may only spawn every 4 to 9 years. During spawning, the eggs are broadcast over a large area and left unattended to hatch in 8 to 10 days. A large female sturgeon can lay as many as 2 million eggs. Spawning occurs in the spring in Canada and often occurs from early May to late June at water temperatures between 13 and 18 degrees Celsius. Now I'm just going to provide you with a few facts of lake sturgeon. The largest lake sturgeon ever caught in Ontario is believed to be 168 pounds. This fish was caught in Georgian Bay in 1982. Now, the biggest one ever caught in the world was 6.5 feet, which is 2 meters. And this specimen was caught in the Lake of Woods in 1953 and was 152 years old, verifying that the lake sturgeon is one of the longest living aquatic species in North America.